This is the Working in Hell podcast with your host, Vinny Blasio. Each episode, Vinny takes you inside the world of New York State Corrections, focusing on both corrections officer and law enforcement issues. And now your host, Vinny Blasio.
Hello, everyone. This is Vinny Blasio with the Working in Hell podcast. So today, I want to give special thanks for last week's guest, both Nicole Falkowitz, for her letter that she graciously provided to be read at last week's podcast. It's my second time hearing that. As I stated, she spoke at the Reality at Sunset Bay, New York. So I want to give her thanks. And then also a special thanks to David Washburn as well. He was the guest on screen for last week's podcast, and we appreciate his time. There's been a lot of feedback. I received a lot of messages and emails, both from the listeners of the podcast, both in audio and video format. So there's been an increase, obviously, in listener and participation. So we want to give thanks to them because you guys both helped the show, and thanks for getting the information out there. It was much needed. And that kind of brings me to what we're going to talk about today. So I did receive a couple messages, even early this morning, for some of the public that are now on watching the podcast. So some of the vernacular that we're using on the terms, obviously, are jailhouse terms that not everybody in John Q. Public is going to understand. So if it seems like I am putting things in layman terms, it is because I'm probably doing that on purpose. So to get a bigger understanding, so people can follow along and know exactly what we're talking about as we try to do the public awareness campaign and let people know exactly what's going on inside our walls. And David last week touched on that so eloquently with the silence within. And there's been, like I said, tremendous feedback on that, because we all know that, nobody is allowed in DOCCS world to speak about what's actually the truth that's going on in our prison system. And it's time that the truth be told, and arm yourself with facts. And we only speak facts and present that to everyone, and let the decision people be that as it may. So we'll get right into the letter. This is written like we try to do every week. This is written from Deirdra Maldonado, who is a nurse at Fishkill Correctional Facility. So I'd like to give her a special thanks and recognition for allowing me to read her letter. So it's a rather lengthy, so I'll get right into it. And bear with me, but it's very well written, and I think you'll enjoy it. So, good day. I am writing this letter to convey both my deep appreciation and even deeper concern for the elite members of NYSDOCCS. I am the following: a New York State registered nurse, a civilian employee of the great state of New York, a citizen in good standing dependent on the protection that New York State DOCCS provides. It has come to my attention over the last 3 years the tremendous efforts that correction officers put forth to protect and serve their respective communities at large. Prior to my employment with the state and involvement with our state's correctional system, I truly had no idea what goes on behind the walls. I will irrevocably give gratitude to the correction officers that afford me the opportunity to do my calling in the safest environment possible. Your officers, namely those at Fishkill Correctional Facility, have gone above and beyond to ensure the safety of this facility's staff and incarcerated individuals relentlessly. Their training is outstanding, and their loyalty to the oath they swore is unmatched. I will continue this letter speaking only for myself, but knowingly that many, if not all, civilians behind the walls are in agreement with me. Your loyal and devoted officers are tired. They are experiencing burnout at an alarming rate. As a healthcare professional, it is my sworn duty to ensure the health of my community. This includes them. I have witnessed your officers ignoring their health and safety only to ensure that of others. As I'm sure you are aware, these officers come into an environment that automatically produces adrenaline responses on a physiological level. In layman's terms, they are in continuous state of fight or flight for a guaranteed 8-hour shift. They are then subject to getting stuck for an additional tour, thus extending their body's stress load. They attempt to adapt by bringing extra food and water. However, there is only so much one can fit in those safety security issued bags. I've conducted many unofficial health surveys on our officers. Since the onset of the pandemic, many have not been to see a physician for a routine checkup. Many have only seen a doctor secondary to contracting COVID and or injuries sustained on the job. I occasionally have officers humor me by allowing me to obtain their blood pressure randomly. I will attest that many of your officers are dangerously hypertensive and had no knowledge of it. As a veteran nurse, my trained eyes can see many of your early onset type 2 diabetes casually consuming carb load food drinks to ensure that they stay frosty for their tour and living off the limited snack vending machines when they get stuck. I have personally asked that some of your officers go to the facility clinic when they have come in for their tour and excuse me, bear with me, when they get stuck. I personally asked that some of the officers go to the facility clinic when they've come in for their tour and them have been hypertensive crisis, stroke, and sudden onset of palsy, just to name a few. With these encounters and knowledge, I've asked them, why don't you see your physician regularly? The answer is always the same. There's not enough time. Time for sleep, rest, recuperation, recreation, families. A proper annual physical can easily take up a whole day, not including diagnostic, testing, lab work, etc. Trying to schedule these life savings appointments should be easy when officers have designated regular days off. However, regular days off are not time to do life and decompress for many hours of being in an intensely high stress state. In 2020, when the pandemic began infiltrating the prison, I was working in the facility RMU when I heard an announcement come through an officer's radio. Vacations are being suspended and mandatory call-in and RDOs was instituted. In all my years of nursing, being in situations of sudden death, expected deaths, trauma, I can honestly say that the morale was physically palpable and extremely low and heavy. It was as if there was a death in the family of officers. I saw officers age dramatically over the next year. Many put in their papers to retire, even though the job was still in their blood. I've watched them show enormous restraint in maintaining the safety of violent and psychotic incarcerated individuals, which is difficult for the most trained, well-rested, well-fed officer, despite their own safety being at risk. The recent changes in our state laws, introducing the HALT programs and the closure of many state facilities, has been proving to be physically, emotionally, and mentally taxing on our officers. I'm not privy to much of the specifics entailed with these implementations, but as a civilian behind the walls, I get the notion that is causing a great strain collectively. There is an increase in violence, incarcerated individual suicide, and in every aspect, many of our officers have hit the wall. They're burned out. There's a low rumbling I've heard in whispers that vacations and regular days off are on the table again. Please, I implore you to consider this with your officers in mind, not the incarcerated individual, not even the community, but your officers. Give them what they deserve, either their time or adequate compensation for their time, which is priceless when you study the mortality rates of correction officers. In closing, I reiterate that I am merely an old nurse that loves being a New Yorker and loves knowing that I am safe in my town. It has been my honor and privilege to work alongside of the products of the Academy. They have shown me the other side of law enforcement, the side unseen, unacknowledged, and unsung, because they are typically unseen and unheard by the very community they serve. I am compelled to be a voice from the community. I thank you for your time in reading this. I pray you understand where it's coming from. Your officers are your greatest asset. Prove that to them as they have proven themselves to their oath, badge, and state. Respectively, Deirdra Maldonado RN. So if that doesn't hit home and that doesn't get a little emotional, I don't know what does. So anybody reading that, and I know I butchered that, and I apologize to Deirdra, but that letter just says so much, that heartfelt thanks, gratitude, and worry is exactly what's going on, exacerbated by the commissioner of DOCCS with the threat of another 3 closures hanging over your head is really ripping, as we said last week, at some of the heartstrings, and families are not staying together. As we recognize this month being suicide prevention, I told you that we've had people, officers and other employees for that matter, that are at the dire end. They don't see a light at the end of the tunnel. And that hurts. It hurts knowing that the state legislator, the governor, and DOCCS have all combined to make this job hell. Working in Hell is the name of the new website and the new podcast, because I couldn't think of a better name for the current conditions that New York State is putting you in. So I apologize for getting a little choked up, but suicide hits home. We've lost many of officers, many of employee staff to suicide throughout the years. But what is going on now is exacerbated throughout the state because we are not taking care of our own. And when I say we, I don't mean the employees or retirees or those. I'm talking about the state has proven time and time again that the employees are nothing but a line item. And to the general public, a line item is what you're getting, how you get paid by New York State. You're not recognized by name. You're not recognized by badge number. You're recognized by a line item number on your paycheck. And that's what you are to New York State. Unfortunately, it's going to take someone getting killed or severely hurt for things to get changed, because the voices and the frustrations are high. Families are being ripped apart by all the mandates and people missing parties and time with their loved ones. And one couldn't even get off to a wake. They had to take off and be disciplined for it. They just recently got a $1,500 fine that was offered to them by New York State because they just said, I have to be there. I have to be there. And to discipline employees for their time off that they already have and mandating to be at work has to come to an end. The employees should not bear the burden of the poor policies of New York State. And more importantly, the bad decisions by the same people who had different titles playing the chess game with New York State should not have, the employees should not bear the burden of poor policies. The employees, I've said it 1,000 times, are not the issue. They have to pay the price. Yes, they're the ones making the sacrifices, not the management that sits up with their feet up on the desk and working Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. The employees, frontline employees, whether it be civilian employees, whether it be correction employees, are paying the price, and it has to stop. Time with family should be number one. And this letter, I mean, this is what she states in here about the hypertension and the low mortality rate. You know, the correction officer average life is 59 years old. That means I have 1 year left to live. Think about that. 59 years. And now you're adding stress. She's exactly right in this letter. You take a look at the conditions that you're working in. You cannot bring the proper food. Your body cannot sustain a series time working without sleep, rest, and recuperation. But yet you're forcing that on them. And then what little time off they do have, they have to try to spend that with families. And then you're going to discipline somebody for trying to go to a wake. New York State is a mess. When is enough enough? I just can't wrap my head around some of this. And then I see the disciplines and the officers that got hurt. Fishkill just had a rash of them. We had another officer that went out by ambulance, and that was Narcan at the facility. And then we had someone that would have needed emergency surgery. I mean, the injuries, the halt, the poor staffing. I mean, if this was a business in any situation in any state or any city of the United States, they'd be shut down. Department of Labor would come in, padlock the doors and saying this is unsafe. But yet, because it's a New York State agency, it's allowed to continue. And it's directly driven by poor policy. It's driven by poor management. It's driven by poor policies. It's driven by poor legislation. I just cannot wrap my head around it. And then you wonder why people are frustrated walking away from the job. And we talked about recruitment last week and about how, that's going to sustain. So you take a new person that's coming onto the job and they're going to want to miss family time, and you expect they're going to make it a year, let alone 25 years. And this is not going to happen. And it's not happening. And just like she said, the people were putting in their retirement. I mean, I apologize for getting a little emotional and a little fired up about this, but these are just facts. They're not my facts. This is a letter someone else has written. This isn't somebody making it up and saying that they're upset with DOCCS. This is a living hell that the officers and staff have to face on a daily basis. And there's no end in sight. There's no end to the recruitment and retention problem. We touched on that. It's like you're getting at both ends. The department has made no efforts to retain the people that they have, and the recruitment speaks for itself. So it's gone way too far in such a short period of time. And I never thought it would be that bad. And it's obviously now it's taking on a toll. And getting back to the Suicide Prevention Month, it's like, we have officers that we have seen an uptick on wanting to do harm to themselves, unfortunately. And a lot of that is the pressure. Your pressure. Could you imagine the pressure at home that this takes? You can't see your family, and the family, if they're not working for the department, they see that you're working all these hours, but they don't understand. They're still not behind the wall suffering the injustice that you're suffering, feces thrown at you daily. The inmates know that there's no penalties anymore, so they're free to do whatever they want. I mean, there's the assaults, which we're going to touch on in a second, have skyrocketed, and nobody wants to touch on that fact. We heard at public protection hearings as well, everything is good. There is an uptick, and even one assault is too many, but the majority of those assaults that we see are not life-threatening. They're either no injury or minor. Well, yeah, I'm glad that you recognized, Mr. Marticello, that even one is too many. But where is the penalty for touching and putting your hands on staff, whether it be correction officer, nurse, it doesn't matter what, plumber, it doesn't matter what that employee is. Nobody deserves to go to work to get injured. And we'll put this right up on the DOCCS's own numbers. I mean, let's take a look at this for a second. So we have the slide one, as you see here, DOCCS numbers in its own, the assaults on staff statewide. We look at the numbers from 2019 to 2020, they increased. From 2020 to 2021, they increased. From 2021 to 2022, they increased again. This is assaults on staff I'm referring to. In 2023, you can see there was 1,671. Put that in perspective, 1,671 with less staff. You have less staff now, and we'll get into that in a minute, than you had it during those years. And already to date, and this was from September 1st, 2024, so just a little over a week ago, and the total for 2024 is already 1,457. That's 1,457 assaults on staff statewide. That's crazy. Right. And it doesn't look any better once you get into the assaults on staff or the assaults on inmate on inmate. Excuse me for not using the word incarcerated individuals. That was not my term when I was in the department just a short time ago. But we'll look at the 19. There was 1,267. In 2020, it went down slightly by 1,206. 2021, it went down slightly to 1,107, but then you get to 2022, right back up at 1,488. And then 2023, we saw especially a rise on inmate assaults to 2,107. And already, now think about this, the department we have, and we'll get into the staffing ratios in a second, as they've decreased those years. You get into 2024 year to date, there's already, and this year is not even, we got a whole quarter left, September's not even done, and we got 1,945. So those numbers, not only should they be alarming, setting off bells, is that they've consistently gone up. It's not like they're coming down or maintaining, and the department can give themselves a pat on the back that they're doing a great job. So let's look at these numbers and say, what are we going to do about it? Putting your head in the sand is not a viable option anymore. And then you look into the various rates that the incarcerated individuals assault on staff for 2019 to 2024. If you look at the second box down, and you see that those, it gives the maximum security inmates and medium security inmates classifications. And we'll talk about classifications. We talked about that a little last week, and it seems like they're waving a magic wand and reclassifying max inmates to mediums. But I'm still waiting on the proof. We'd like to talk facts only. So we'll wait for the facts until I get that paperwork. So and then we'll show it here. I don't care. What's the department going to do to me anymore? And then you look at the quarterly results on the last box there. So then we get into the slide 2. When you look at now these numbers, this report is taken directly off DOCCS website. All right, research and reports. You go to the fact sheet for September, and these are their stats. They're not my stats. They didn't pick them out of the air. This report obviously is written and prepared by DOCCS. So you see that the assault degree of injury to staff, no injury, minor, moderate, seriously, severe. Now they pick of what is severe. Now we just had an assault where a sergeant was knocked unconscious. To DOCCS, just so we're clear, they consider a concussion knocked out to be moderate. To me, any concussion that you have, if the NFL considers it to be severe or serious, I don't know why that's not considered more than moderate in DOCCS's eyes. But they come up with the category, and they designate what is minor, moderate, severe, and serious. So I don't necessarily agree with their categorization or how they label that. But again, you can see the breakdown on this second slide here. And then it goes into the escapes, and then we'll touch on the prison closures since we are scheduled for 5 to have been announced, and everybody seems like they've forgotten that there's 3 more, or the threat from DOCCS commissioner that there's 3 more hanging in the wind. So if, like he said, if recruitment doesn't improve, we have 3 more out there. So let's not forget that, people. So prison closure since 1999, DOCCS prison population has declined by approximately 54%, from a high of 72,649 incarcerated individuals to 33,589 as of September 1st, 2024. So think about that. So the population has been down since 54%. So you have less inmates, but now all of a sudden we're at a higher rate of assaults on staff and assaults on inmate on inmate. So, you know, the report doesn't take into consideration that, just like inflation, you have to factor in what it would be and what those increases are, not just number wise, but with the loss of population, we should also, those numbers would show a much bigger assault rate. So we'll get into the third slide here. And this is, again, taken directly off the fact sheet. And you'll see the breakdown of DOCCS security staff reductions have been consistent with the incarcerated population declines. In each of the prison years, more than 96 of the effective employees remained employed, retired, or resigned. So that's a pretty, hidden caveat there that, since the prison closure years, more than 96 of the affected employees remained employed, retired, or resigned. Yeah, how many retired because they didn't want to? So we could all say they retired, but they wouldn't have retired if the prison's closed. And they resigned because of the high rates of assault, so that doesn't take that into consideration either. So, but even when you start looking at it starts at the year 2003 and comes down for 20 years to 2023. You can see that 2003, we had a much higher staffing ratio. I don't like the staffing ratio terms that there's 3.2 we'll take in the end of the year of 2003, because that's as if every officer was working 7 days a week, 24 hours on every shift. You would have 3.2 incarcerated population versus the officers. So the staffing ratio 3.2. But even that, you can see that it's declined. And even as we come down to the population of the staffing ratios, it went all the way down to 1.8 in 2021. and then it get slightly better, 1.9, if you want to call that better, in 2022, and then by 0.3 it went up in 2022 or 23 to 2.2. But you look at that population number of last year of the, I won't say population number, excuse me. We want to look at the correction officers, sergeants, and lieutenants. So you look at the security items that were at the end of 2023, and that was 15,143. So that was a loss from the year before. And then we'll get into versus the inmate population, which increased from 2000. So we have less officers from 2022 to 23. If you look at that, in 2022, there was 16,178 officers, sergeants, and lieutenants. And then that decreased in 2023 to 15,143. So we lost another 6.4% change. But the inmate population actually increased to 32,766, which on 2022, it was 31,329. So you had a 4.6 increase in inmate population, but you had a loss of 6.4% in an officer employment. So that's another thing that people are talking about is the staffing ratios and the loss of people taking the job. And then we'll get to right now, if we get into the next slide, we take that and we look at August of 24. So you're looking at from the year end of 2023 for the NYSDOCCS sergeants, officers, and the Council 82 lieutenants. There was 424 lieutenants in 2023. August, there was 412. So sergeants, the same thing. There was 1,043, which are represented by NYSDOCCS. August of 24, there was 1,025. Officers, there was 13,676 at the year end of 2023. And here in August of 2024, we're looking at 12,897. So again, you total those together, 2023, you had a total of 14,719. And it is August, you were looking at 13,922. So when you total that up together, still, we'll take the 2023, it's 15,143 versus now, which we've had a net loss again of 14,334 security staff. So that gives you the breakdown and sees the direction that people are fleeing for the door, flying through the doors, and we wonder why we're having the problems that we're having as far as the retention and recruitment problems. So then, if you look in the same report, we're getting into the violent felony offenses, medium versus maximum. I know that that's still high. When you look at it, for here it goes 19. It goes in 5-year blocks from 2019 to 2024. So it shows the increase in that, and then you're going on to the violent offenders total, which is increased. So you have a much more violent inmate just in general. It doesn't matter if it's a medium or max right now. You just have a more violent inmate from even a year ago. And then you can see that the different numbers through each year. And then you have the last page, then you have the inmate. That'll show you the page. The last slide here shows you the inmate deaths. So just wanted to give a little breakdown, a little explanation, because a lot of people sent me some messages even this morning, like I said, about, they didn't understand the report. They don't understand what some of these terms are. And I tried to bring it to life the best I can. And, even when they read these reports, it's like they're hieroglyphics because they don't get the vernacular and the terms using by DOCCS. And DOCCS does that, especially when you get into the HALT report. They do that on purpose. So the general public doesn't get a very good understanding because it's not in layman's terms of what's really happening out there. So just some boring statistics. I know that I probably lost a lot of you in that report, but it does go in correlation to what's happening today. The staffing ratios, it goes to a more violent inmate, it goes to the retention and recruitment problem. And obviously, I'm sure all sides, meaning the if they could wave a magic wand in New York and make people take the job, that would solve a lot of it. But when you have poor management, you have poor recruiting, you have poor policies, you have poor laws in New York State, and people want to argue about the HALT Act and about the implementation of it. There was no need for an implementation into law to codify that law in New York State. And like I said, if they wanted to think that they were doing a stroke of genius by rewarding criminals for bad behavior, they could have did a pilot program. They could have done anything, but every person that works the job told them this isn't going to work and this is what's going to happen. And now you have some naysayers or people that fully support HALT saying that it isn't HALT if you haven't gave it a chance, and that it's the implementation of HALT. Well, that is totally bogus and just a flat out lie. The numbers speak to themselves. When you look at the correlation between the population of and the number of assaults, not just with officers, you can see that it's getting higher and higher, and not everything gets reported the way that it should. Having been a watch commander and part of the UI process, which we'll talk about at another time, I'm not a firm believer that you write every UI the exact same way and fits into this night shell, and people tell you what is a UI and what isn't, and that's certainly I have some issues with, but that's the least of our concerns at the time, because the numbers would be much higher. And that's a state problem. That's a DOCCS agency management problem. Not to keep beating up on the management, but when they are not listening and taking in the suggestions of the frontline staff of how to improve things, how to do things, and warned as far as HALT, can't blame the department necessarily for HALT, but they didn't do anything to stop it or say this isn't going to work either. And the same people, people want to say, well, this person wasn't here, or Dan Marticello wasn't commissioner at the time. Well, the hell, he was in the department, not as long as I have, but almost. And he likes to brag that he did all these different positions and he was the director of personnel. So I kind of think that this falls directly at his feet. Knowing from a lot of people that are still work for DOCCS and still talk to him or are still doing their jobs, they're not going to come out and say negative things about the department or him, but they don't believe in his leadership. They don't believe in the policies that New York State has created. Talk to some of these individuals that I talk to privately and have some candid conversations, because they're smart. There's some smart people out there, and not everybody in management is bad. They're bad because they're put in a unwinnable and untenable situations. Superintendents have a facility to run, but they're running it with one arm behind their back because the Building 2 is micromanaging them, number one. And number two, they're not providing them the resources nor the manpower to be able to get the jobs done at each and every facility. And these same people that, are going up through the ranks, some are good, some are bad, just like everybody in society. But if you talk to them privately, as I have, they're not a believer in the mission of DOCCS any longer. They're not a mission of a lot of things that this department is saying, doing, at the moment. And I think you see a lot of people, even in DOCCS positions of management, that those two are leaving and running for the door. So I will leave that portion alone, because I don't want to keep picking a scab, so to speak, because everybody wants to pass the buck. Nobody wants to take blame. And if we could get out of the situation that we're currently in, with the assault skyrocketing, the bad law with HALT, and the employment crisis that we're in, I'd say responsibility doesn't matter. Let's just solve the problem. But when people are giving you the solutions and trying to contact the governor, contacting the legislature, and contacting DOCCS, and all sides are saying, oh yeah, we recognize there's a recruitment problem, but nobody's doing anything about it as far as the true reasons that people are flying for the door. We can say that we're doing regional hiring and all this other recruitment techniques that may or may not be working. But let's just say that they, just talking to someone from the employee EIU, Employee Investigation Unit, saying that, yeah, we've got an uptick from the regional. We've done some of the background checks, and some of them just aren't going to make it. Some of them are being pushed through anyway with the hope that they just need a body, for lack of a better word. And they know that when they or have an idea of where these employees are going to be a year from now, that they're going to wash out. When I say wash out, that means that we all know that as soon as they go to the academy, if they're past a background check, that they go to the academy, they start the academy, they tour their first facility to see what it's really like. And at that facility, they say, "Oh, wow, the inmates are running around unsupervised and free movement. Oh, I didn't realize this." And then they go back to the academy, and the next day they're no longer there. They wash out, they go home, and they say, "This job isn't for me." And then we get to after the academy, they get to the facility, and they say, "Okay." And then they realize, you know what, this job isn't for me, shift work, and this is under normal circumstances. Now you get to today's environment, you get out of the academy, if you're those that have not washed out, and those that stuck out their OJT, once they get to their OJT facility and they finally get to their home facility, now all of a sudden you're going to say, "Hey, guess what? You're not, well, I got to work Christmas. I got to work Thanksgiving." Well, yeah. Prisons don't close 24/7. We're open shop. Okay, well, what do you mean? I can't get my regular day off anymore? No, you gave up a holiday, you gave up your time with your family, and now you have a regular day off. I'm going to get that holiday off. It came on my regular day off, and now, sorry, you're mandated. You have to be there, and this family life isn't going to last long, and there's going to be no longevity there. So now all of a sudden they're finally at their home facility, and they realize that within a year's time, I've never had a holiday off. I don't have my regular day off. You think that those people, on the most part, are going to stick it out? So instead of having, a dropout rate in the first year, or those that leave for another agency or another department, it's 80%, you would have 80% stay. Now all of a sudden that trickles down to maybe you don't have 80% stay. Maybe you have 60, 40. I don't know what the number is. I'll be interested in the statistics of that. But in today's environment, who in their right mind is going to stick it out and say, yeah, this is a great job? I don't think most people wake up in the morning and say, as a child, and say, "Hey, I want to be a correction officer." I don't know if that's one of the goals, but it used to be a dignified and proud career. I know when I first got in, it was. I was canvassed by Buffalo Police. I took all the exams, scored very high. Department of Corrections called when I first put in my application. There wasn't even a test at that time, and we're going back to the late 80s. And then in I believe 90, they instituted the exam again. I got hired again in 93. So there was a civil service test on that. And then I was like, yeah, this is something I can be proud of. It took me years to get home, but I stuck it out. It was a job that I wanted. It was a job that provided decent benefits. Nobody, as my father always said, with public service, you're never going to be rich, but you're never going to be poor. And you're working to have a great benefits and pension. One day you're going to realize that it was all worth it. And I'll never criticize the benefits, though being retired, it's becoming unbearable as far as the health insurance, what it is, but that's a subject for another day. But the pension, you'll always have that. So I won't badmouth it, but I didn't have to work in the conditions starting out that are going on today. I didn't get being 300-400 miles away from home when I first started out, which I was, and did that for years, and traveling back and forth. But I didn't have to worry about my days off, or not getting vacation time, or not getting my regular days off getting mandated, because that did not happen on a regular basis. It did happen. We had an escape, and we did have to get called in, but that's perfectly understandable. That was an emergency situation. A staffing crisis that's been years in the making, and we're well over 2 years now that in the serious mode, is no longer a crisis. You can't call something a crisis and let it continue. If that's the way that it is, then that's nothing else but bad management. And somebody needs to be responsible for that. Again, solve the problem. Let's stop blaming each other. And everything's, like I said last time, is at the finger pointing club. DOCCS blames the governor or the legislator. The department is blaming the legislator, and the legislators are blaming the department. It's like everybody's pointing the finger at somebody else. And that's all well and good, but at the end of the day, it doesn't solve the problem. So solve the problem and make these individuals and employees have a safe environment. Let's start there. Let's make it safe. Then let's also take a look, and I need a family life. Let's stop taking people's time off away for them. Their regular days off should never, ever, ever be in question unless it's a serious nature of a riot escape. And, right now we're going into the anniversary of the Attica riots and some of the assaults and some of the incidences that I won't get into because of some security concerns. But I've seen video recently that just is disturbing. I've heard inmates chanting, and it's scary. And I watched this, and my mouth is open because I just can't believe that the department has deteriorated this bad in such a short period of time, that this is what we're now looking at. And, as I said, we're going into the anniversary of the Attica riots, and we're headed there again. Nobody wants to talk about that. Nobody wants to have a bad day. Nobody wants that situation. Nobody wants to get injured. Nobody signs up for a job to get feces thrown at them. But getting back on point, we're looking at the anniversary of the riots, and what position are we putting our employees in right now? We're putting them in an untenable, unsafe working environment, and nobody is doing anything about it. The staffing levels are so bad. I won't get into some of the things because out of operational security concerns. There's a lot of secrecy. Some of it I get because, as I said last podcast, I get some of the security concerns. But we have to talk. We have to have a larger conversation, and sometimes we have to let these things out in order for change to be effectuated. And we're there. I don't want to see anybody get hurt, but people are getting hurt every day. Somebody said to me the other day that I thought that was a really bad thought process is, well, you should want to come in on your day off so somebody else, or you should not want to have your vacation because somebody else is just going to get mandated. And I said this last week. So we're looking at a very short summer in New York State. So you're looking at from Labor Day to Memorial Day, those short weekends that you have, that usually everybody does their family time with. Weddings are planned, and home parties and stuff for the children are all planned upon that short period of time of the weekends. And now all of a sudden you're saying, okay, we're going to start ripping that away from you. And now you have people saying that I should give up that time and I'm bad just so somebody else doesn't get mandated. Nobody should get mandated. They're absolutely right on that one. But somebody taking time off that they rightfully deserve, or not wanting to come in on a regular day off because they have something planned, or even if they don't, their time off is for their mental health acuity alone. So let's stop blaming each other for wanting the time off and wanting to spend time with your family and having the time off that you earned and deserve, and stop blaming each other and put the blame where it clearly lies. And that's at the feet of management, saying that we didn't climb this because management's winning. When we blame each other and do the finger pointing, don't do this, don't do that, and your time off, and we can all sit there and blame each other. But at the end of the day, that does no good. Management created this disaster. It's time that they pick up the pieces and do something about it. And taking away and mandating with all these memos that are out there, RDOs and regular days off, for those that don't know what RDOs stand for, is not the answer. We keep talking about it, but we have to keep talking about it over and over and over again. Someone just told me today a good story, and I just literally hung up at the phone before I started this podcast. And he stated it. He goes, "Let me give you an example of it." He was going to a priest that was just into a new parish, And at the end of every sermon, or it'll start with the first sermon, he came out and he's talking to the parishioners, and he says that, I'm happy for everybody. I want you to go home, and I want you to be kind to each other. And everybody clapped, and everybody was in agreement. So week 2, he gives a sermon and says the same thing. I want everybody to be kind to each other. I want everybody to go home, be kind. And that's your message for the week. Then it's like, okay, everybody claps, everybody gets it. Week 3, the same thing. The priest comes out, tells his parishioners, I want you to be kind to one another. So, there's a little more silence. After the service is over, he gets approached by some of the parishioners, and he's like, listen, Father, we've heard the sermon over and over again. And at the end, you keep giving us the same message, be kind to each other. And then he's like, well, he goes, you're right. He goes, when you learn to be kind to each other, then we can move on to the next step. And that's kind of where we are today. Simplistic terms, it's no easy fix. But when we get past looking out for each other and looking out that the RDOs actually mean something, then we can move on to the next step. And, and that's kind of where we're at. We need to, as I end every podcast with the same mantra, and it's because I thoroughly believe that, especially with the mental health crisis that we're facing inside the walls every day because of the untenable position that DOCCS has put the employees in, is be kind to one another, because you do not know what the person sitting next to you is going through. And after listening to so many heartbreaking stories and listening to family problems and people that are getting displaced out of the 2 facilities, and the problems that they're having with the children and their needs, and these stories are very touching, and they're very heartbreaking, and they bring a tear to my eye, and I have empathy for them. But and nobody ever will say, if something needs to be closed, then work out a solution and say that. But we all know that that's not the case. DOCCS has closed so many correctional facilities, in the last 12 years that it would make your head spin. And we know that it's the environment today doesn't call for more closures. What it calls for is more compassion and more policies that lean more towards its employees than it does the incarcerated individuals. And just like a society today, when you reward those that do bad behavior, what do you think the problem is going to be? But I'm kind of rambling and all over the place. To get back on track, let's be kind to one another, and you don't know what the person next to you is going through, and especially more today than ever is, there's a big home life problem. There's a big, I've heard it on the radio stations when they were doing that, and the WBEN special that 9:30 a.m. Buffalo put on. I heard a lot of employees almost crying on air. Then you could tell that they're frustrated. The wife of several officers were on there. The one with the mother was working, and the son is basically watching the daughter, basically providing both mother and father for the single family home. I mean, these stories are gut wrenching, and nobody should be in that. But that's the time that we're living in today. And I don't know what the immediate answer is, other than it can't continue like this. I mean, the direct answer would be to immediately repeal, halt, and get some of these programs back to where they were years ago. So you have the staff, because we all know that the for halt, it's staffing intensive. And that it's great to create laws, but when you don't give the staff to go along with it, and you can't get the staff to goes with it, what good does that do anybody? And it doesn't help the situation. It only compounds the problem. So getting back to where we are, like the assaults, I wanted to make sure that we ended that and get back on track a little bit with the assault number. Like I said, we're at 1,457 year to date. So that's almost where we are with 2022 or 2023. I'm sorry. It's 1,671. So we're almost right there. So if that doesn't set off alarm bells and say we need something done immediately, I don't know what is. I mean, and even when you look at the inmate on inmate assaults, you're already at that total 2,107 for 2023, and we're only at September 1st. This report came out, so that doesn't take September, October, November, and December. There's 4 months left, and you've already are just about at that total. 2,107 inmates were assaulted, and we're at 1,945. You know, where are we going? You know, it's not safe for anyone. So if it's not safe for the inmates and not safe for the employees, people forget about that. And they're like, well, you know, why do we care about the, these numbers so much? It's like, well, look where the statistics are taking you. And look at the inmate on inmate assault numbers that I just gave you. If it's not safe for the inmates, it's not safe for the employees, all employees, not just security staff. Obviously, security staff has to go in there and pick up the pieces 9 out of 10 times. And it's getting worse. And they keep saying that we have, new tools and new technology. We have cameras now, and we have pepper spray, and you have all this new technology. Okay, I'll go along with that. We have this new technology that we're using. We have the video cameras. We have the camera systems inside the prison system, and we have chemical agents that now we have the pepper spray that people are issued, and the assaults are still rising. Let that sink in. The assaults are still rising. So it's time. It's time for people to listen. It's time for people to act. Those people in positions of power. We can all do our complaining and telling each other how bad it is. But until we start writing our letters to the governor and started screaming from the rooftops to this governor, the legislator, and DOCCS, it does include DOCCS because they are part of the problem, then is the only way that we're going to effectuate any change. Screaming on to each other and being on Facebook or X or whatever social media, just going back and forth with each other does not solve the issues. It needs to be brought to a bigger platform. It needs to be brought to directly and laid at the governor's feet as we see the crisis in crime all over. Rochester, just the last 3 days, I've been listening to the scanner, and it sounds like we're living in Mogadishu. It's like a war zone that I'm listening to the shootings and the car chases and the burglaries and bullets flying into people's homes. The one truck running through the living room. It's like I don't recognize in New York sometimes. Now, I removed myself from New York for transparency reasons. I no longer reside in New York. I could not effectuate change at the voting booth, so I voted with my feet. I left New York and moved to Florida, and Florida is now my home and has been for the last 3.5 years. Or is it 4 years now? Time flies when you're having fun, but I left New York for that reason. But as you know, my heart and soul, my family, my friends and coworkers and fellow retirees, a lot of you still reside in New York, and I still care enough that I take hours out of my day every day to try to help you and make your situation better. I hope that people are listening. I hope you appreciate the people that are trying for you, because you do have a lot of people that are trying to advocate for you on your behalf and try to make policy changes, try to make your job and your situation a little bit better. Whether the fruits of that will be known anytime soon is unbeknownst to us, but people are trying for you. So hang in there. With that said, we'll end today's podcast on the prison safety note. And again, we want to thank today's letter. We only did the one. So I want to make sure that we give kudos to the well-written letter from Deirdra Maldonado. So I want to give special thanks to her for allowing me to use her words and her voice. Though I butchered it a little bit, I apologize for that. And we'll see you again next week for another week. Or we're starting with the Working in Hell podcast. We've switched teams a little bit, and we'll have some advertisement at the beginning of next week's podcast and try to move things along for us in a better way. So again, remember to be kind. You never know what the person next to you is going through. Thank you all for listening. Again, it's Vinny Blasio, and thank you for the Working in Hell broadcast.
You've been listening to the Working in Hell podcast with Vinny Blasio. Find this podcast on any of your favorite platforms like Audible, iHeart, and Spotify. And be sure to check out www.workinginhell.com for more information and important links. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.